The RAC Club in Pall Mall, an elegant location that reflects a golden age of motorsport. And we're here to meet a man who embodies the values and sense of adventure of that era. He was never world champion, but now, even 50 years on, he remains the most famous and familiar name the British sport has ever produced. Stirling, great to see you in these historic surroundings. First thing you could do for us maybe is give us an idea of what British motorsport was like. What did it consist of in those immediate, difficult post-war years?
Well, from my point of view, I mean, it started off, we didn't have races because there were no circuits. And then, of course, they started with the airports, I think Dunholm Lodge or somewhere like that. But in principle, it was very, very restricted because there were not many cars, there were no established drivers, which from my point of view was great. I mean, all the established drivers then were, of course, a lot older than they had been before the war. And therefore, it was a fairly clean sheet. And 500cc cars were the start of it with John Cooper. He really did the first one. So it was mostly 500cc racing.
So what was it gave you the enthusiasm for the sport at 17, 18
Well, I've been
years
brought up with cars. My father raced, although he was a dentist, he raced in Indianapolis. My mother had driven competitions, you know, trials and so on. And I'd been brought up with fast cars. And I remember one day we were coming back to home and we went past Cooper Car Company, which in those days was a front window, and in there was a 500. I said, "Oh, Dad, let's go and have a look at it." We went over, stopped, and went to have a look at it. And of course, luckily, Charlie Cooper, John's father, had known my father at Brooklands, and so they got chatting and so on. I said, "What about letting me buy one of those, Dad?" Well, I'd won some money at riding horses, and I said, "Look, I can put up a certain amount from that, and you know, will you let me have a bit?" And we could use the horse box, take the divider out to take the car around in. And anyway, he agreed, and so that's how, from my point of view, how it started.
But you'd actually plotted that moment going past the Cooper showroom?
Well, no, it was pure luck. I mean,
really?
Yeah, oh yes, absolutely. They're at Kingston or Surbiton, yeah. And I saw this thing, and I had no idea. I don't think I even knew about the 500s then. I'd read about it a bit, but hadn't driven one or anything.
Yeah. First experience on a circuit, though, was before the war. I think your father took you to Brooklands.
Yeah, I mean, I was not driving. My father took me to Brooklands because he raced there. And he took me there, and of course, in the paddock, they had cars in those days with outside exhaust pipes, which were always bound with asbestos string. And I ran across to see how fast it would go, you know, look at the speedo or something. And of course, leant across this thing and burnt my tummy. And got what we call my piano keys. So I've still got, actually, if I shave it, I've still got five sort of little marks about that long. Yeah. And a lot of screaming, I'm sure. You know, butter went on, you know, all that sort of stuff.
That should have put you off.
Yes, quite. But see, I was, what, six years old. Yeah. The first track that we went to, or custom-made one, of course, was Goodwood. Yeah. Really.
And in those early hill climbs, the first hill climbs that you went to, I think there was immediate success, and you made an immediate impression. Yeah, what was it that you found in yourself that seemed to give you an advantage over others?
Well, my advantage really was that I was 17 years old, and therefore it was easier for Kay Peter, who was quite an important journalist at that time, to write a story about a 17-year-old who went up a hill than it is a man who's 36 or whatever. And I got the Cooper, went to the hill climbs. Luckily, I think I was fourth on the first one, and then I won all the rest of the ones that year. And then John Heath came to me, and John Heath had built a car called an HWM, which was Hersham Walton Motors, and he built this two-seater race car and said, would I drive for him next year? So I leapt at that, and Lance Macklin and I were the team, and we'd go around every weekend going to places like Sable de Lone and Aix-les-Bains, you know, all these, San Remo. A fantastic life. I mean, can you imagine a better life than that for a kid of 17 years old, going all around this place, and all the pretty girls, you know, all the crumpet was there. A fantastic life.
You learned a lot about life, I've heard, from the likes of Lance Macklin.
Yes.
What sort of character was he?
Lance Macklin was so smooth. He was, I mean, Lance didn't move. If you're having a drink at the bar, not alcohol because we didn't drink, but having whatever orange, suddenly Lance would what we call slant off. He'd just go like that, and you'd look across, and there was some pretty girl over there. And he used to take his sleeves and turn them up. I remember that. And you know, then there was a time when the collar, people wear their collars up. He was a very smooth character.
Yeah, and you were impressionable. You were taking
very
all this
impressionable.
in.
He was 32 years old, fast driver, good driver, and certainly very, very adept with the ladies. And so he was my mentor, if you like.
What sort of ambitions did you have at this time, away from the ladies, more in terms of your racing progress forward? What sort of plan did you have?
Well, the plan that I had really was going from race to race, as many as we could do. I mean, with the way it worked in those days, you got starting money, which was money from your team to get from a race here to another one, and they'd come along and negotiate at a race. They say they were at Silverstone, they'd then be negotiating for a race the following week or 2 weeks or whatever, and then you'd set the deal and say, okay, we want £300 or £400, whatever it was. And Alf Francis, my mechanic, and he had a couple of other guys, they'd load the cars into a truck and drive, you know, quite a hard life for them, really, but a lot of fun, I think.
And Team Moss, at this point, Alf Francis, you mentioned, your mechanic, was with you through a large part of your career.
Oh, a lot. To start with, my team was just my father and myself. My mother would come along, maybe a girlfriend or something. And I remember a hill climb was only half a mile. But after that, we would take this engine and undo it and take the head off, grind the valves in again. I mean, it made no difference whatsoever. But you know, it was something to do, and it was terrific. We really were a wonderful life.
The next step forward as Grand Prix racing started to re-establish itself and what we know as Formula One these days, I suppose the ultimate was Mercedes at that point, but...
that's 55.
Yeah, but Maserati came before that, but you were thinking Mercedes even at that early point.
Well, what happened was that my father called up Neubauer and said, look, you know, would you consider my son to join the team? This is 1953, I think. We heard they were coming out in 54. And Neubauer said to him, look, we've seen how well he goes, but he's driving pretty, you know, not very quick cars. We'd like to know what he could do in a competitive car. And so my father then went down to Maserati and said to Maserati, look, will you sell us a car? Which they did. And they said, well, we'll keep the car up to date, and anything that we develop you can have, we'd buy it. And so I got a 250F Mazda, which is a lovely car. Alf Francis looked after it, and I remember so well when one race I'm going on the straight, and Jean Bera comes past me really quite fast, and goes up, and he was in the same car. So I said to Maserati, you know, what the hell, he's got a lot more power. Oh, well, we said we didn't want to give you something till we checked it out. So I was second best to Jean Bera, but and then went on from there, really.
Your father was enormously supportive at this time and effectively bought the car for you, didn't he?
Yes, he did, really.
Yeah.
And he came round everywhere with me, and he enjoyed the life. There were a lot of people he knew from before the war and also since the war, of course, and it was a great time.
Battling for second place, number 7, Stirling Moss in his privately entered Maserati, and Hawthorne in a Ferrari.
So what are your memories of that season and the progress you made with the Maserati?
Well, the thing that really got it for me was I arrived at Bern, which was a very, very fast, difficult circuit, dangerous circuit through the woods, and it was wet. And I managed to put my Mazda, private Mazda, on pole in front of the factory and everything, Fangio. They were all behind me, and at that time he said, right, next year you can join Mercedes with Fangio.
But you were still yet to make the breakthrough. You were still to sort of chalk up a really big international championship win, and that wasn't going to be far away. How did the move to Mercedes then come about?
Well, the move to Mercedes came about because he'd seen what I did in the practice thing, and then he'd obviously seen me at race circuits where Mercedes had been, and I was with my Mazda. And they said, look, next year would you like to join Fangio and Carl Kling, and then later on Hans Hermann. And so I joined Mercedes, which was a fantastic. I mean, incredible. Anything you wanted, they do. I mean, if you want slightly higher geared steering, they'd do it. If you wanted this, if you want a mirror up, they'd do anything you like.
Were you picky in that respect? Did you know what you wanted?
No, I've been racing long enough, so I knew I wanted a really good footrest here. And you know, the one problem with the Mercedes was the gearbox was back to front, and which doesn't sound difficult, and it isn't difficult until you're in a hurry. And so, in other words, normally you go first, second, third, fourth, fifth. On this one, it was first, second, you push straight forward and came across the box. So coming down from fourth, normally into third, you cross the box, and of course that would ruin the engine. Yeah. Except it had desmodromic valve gears, which was very forgiving, very forgiving.
And you always wanted the accelerator on the right as well, which made you a bit of a pain.
Yeah, well, no, you see, the point was I once had raced a car with its accelerator in the middle, and which is no problem until something happens, you tread on the wrong pedal. Write the car off. Yeah. You know.
Neubauer was the man who made the deal, Alfred Neubauer, who was the motorsport boss of Mercedes. We're used to larger-than-life characters these days, but what was he like?
Well, Neubauer, he was really incredible. I mean, he looked after us like his children, you know, he really did. And he would, in the team, he'd say, right, Fangio's the most senior, and he doesn't want to get up too early, so if we're doing a 24-hour test, he can have the prime time. Hans Hermann, you're the junior one, you can get up and do the difficult bit with the fog and all that sort of stuff. I remember at Le Mans, thing came over the PA, anybody without an armband would be thrown out. Now, of course, he never wore armbands, so he just took his handkerchief and tied it around, put it around his arm. You know, I mean, but he's a very imposing man, and a great, when you saw him timing, people thought he was timing the laps. He wasn't. He had people doing that. He would time a car to see whether your engine was dropping off, whether it took you longer to go from third to fourth or second to third, whatever. So he knew that, you know, how your car was going and that sort of stuff. Fantastic man.
Stirling Moss was driving one of the Mercedes under the eagle eye of the German team manager, Neubauer. Off they go on the first of 90 laps round this 3-mile circuit. And as everybody expected, the Mercedes were setting a heatwave pace.
Your own driving style at this point, I think you'd already established that sort of famous straighter. Where did that come from, and what sort of
that
function
came
did
because
it
I
serve?
saw Farina, and Farina looked so smooth, and he's like this, and I thought, God, that it's got a little class. And I went to Mazda. This is when I went to Mazda's, and they said, we don't build cars like that, because theirs were like this. And I said, well, I'm buying this car. So Alf went round, and what they do is they put the bulkhead here. There's a row hoop that goes round, and it was in the normal place. And Alf cut it off and welded it another 4 or 5 inches further away. And Fantuzzi, the body man, came in the next day, made the body, wrapped it over where it should be. It was done. And so I got it like this, but not because Mazda's agreed.
But this was all about you looking cool, right?
Oh, that was all that was. I thought, no, but also it does give you the benefit you can get much further round without crossing up. I mean, if you're like this, it's a lot more difficult. And you know, you get a style because you find, I mean, some people would drive leaning forward like Mike. You could see Mike, he's crouching like this. Drivers have a way of sitting. And I just felt that sitting back looked a lot cooler, actually, in those days.
Having joined the Mercedes team in 1955, still at only 25 years old, Moss was paired with the then 2-times world champion Juan Manuel Fangio. This gave Stirling the perfect opportunity to learn from the master.
Fangio was a fantastic man. He was a lovely man anyway, and he would never, ever go off. I mean, if you followed Jack Brabham, for instance, he'd go over the gravel and you get all the crap over you. See, Fangio wouldn't do that. He'd let me sit there, and we were known as a train. And Neubauer came up to me one day, he said, you know, I don't like this idea. He said, what happens if Fangio goes off? I said, well, Fangio does not go off.
The master takes La Source, the pupil close behind.
So where do you put Fangio among the greatest of all time?
Oh, to me, yes. Now, it's very difficult to compare drivers from when it was dangerous, you know, in the 50s, when if you had a crash, you quite likely might die, to now, when, of course, the cars are fantastic. If they stay strapped in, unless somebody else's wheel hits them, it really is pretty safe. And so you can't really compare. I mean, obviously today one would have to say Vettel is fantastic what he's doing. But whether he would do that, and I think he probably might, but whether he would do that or not, if it was really dangerous, one doesn't know. And you only know about the people, obviously, of the era when the danger was there.
But you, at that time in the mid-50s, had, or seemed to have, the versatility that Fangio didn't have. He was always in great cars. You were better than him in sports cars.
Yes, I could beat him in sports cars. Yeah. And I asked him, I remember saying to him once, you know, why weren't you faster? And he said, well, I don't like not seeing the wheels. Well, I mean, you know, frankly, if you're driving, you're looking 200 yards ahead. You're not looking like 2 yards. Yeah. And which I never understood, but he didn't like sports cars.
The important breakthrough for you in '55 as well came at Aintree, with the British Grand Prix win, for which this magnificent trophy is still in the trophy cabinet here at Pall Mall.
The British Grand Prix was run at Aintree. Works teams from Ferrari, Maserati, Van Wall, Gordini and Connaught were there, as was Neubar, and 4 of his silver cars to be driven by Fangio, Moss, Kling and the veteran Taruffi.
I did actually qualify for pole in practice, but there were no team orders. The only team orders with Mercedes was when a Mercedes, doesn't matter whose it was, had 30 seconds lead, believe it or not, on the next car in the race. Then they put out a sign that said REG, regulari, in other words, hold your position. And of course at Aintree, I didn't have as good a start, I think, as Fangio. Anyway, I dropped back a little bit and then I managed to catch him up and I managed to pass him. And then I went as hard as I could.
The 4 Mercedes led the field: Moss, Fangio, Kling and Taruffi.
I said to him quite often, you know, did you let me win it? Because he's the sort of guy who would say, look, it's Stirling's home Grand Prix, what the hell, I've got so many others. And he said, no, he said, it was your day. Well, it was my day winning, so whether it was my day, because he backed off a bit, I don't know. I truly don't know, because he's such a gentleman, he would never have said anything, you know, that wasn't right.
To the unbounded delight of the huge crowds, Stirling led across the line to win his first Grand Prix and to go down in history as the first British driver to win this event.
All I do know is, in my mind, he was the greatest driver in the dangerous time.
It was indeed a dangerous time. A month before Stirling's triumph at Aintree, he'd witnessed one of the worst accidents in motorsport history when Pierre Levay's Mercedes crashed at the Le Mans 24-hour race, tragically killing over 80 spectators. The race continued with Moss, Fangio, Kling and Seymour in the other Mercedes cars, but at 4 a.m. the team withdrew from the race as a sign of respect, and by the end of the season they were out of motorsport altogether.
After the accident, John Fitch got Neubar and he said, look, you've got to phone the directors at their homes, and so we should pull out as a respect to the dead. Well, I mean, all that does really is shows guilt more than anything else. And anyway, they did. They got through the directors and they said, yes, all right, pull out at 4 a.m. Well, now at 4 a.m. we had, I think it was 3 or 4 laps ahead of Mike, and Mercedes don't brake, and Fangio and myself would do very comfortably in the lead. And obviously I was very disappointed because quite a big, important race to win, and I didn't think that they should be pulled out. And in fact, I had an American, believe it or not, come up to me and say, you know why they pulled out? Because they had nitromethane in the chassis. I said, what are you talking about? They refueled from overhead. He said, but they're that clever. The chassis tubes were all filled up with nitromethane, and they had a metering device that put nitromethane, of course being a liquid explosive really, would increase the power, and by doing that through the 24 hours they would win it, which is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. But there you are.
And they were out full time at the end of the season. What kind of a career setback was that for you?
Oh, terrible. I mean, when you've raced for Mercedes, with their efficiency and their organisation. And I mean, it doesn't seem much now, but we actually had 56 mechanics. Now, I know today they have God knows how many, but then I was racing for Maserati, you'd have 2 or 3, and they pick up one guy in the local town, you know, to polish the cars, you know. So it was a completely different thing. And obviously I went to Maserati because I knew them and liked them, and the cars were lovely to drive, but nothing like Mercedes. Yeah. I mean, I had the feeling that if I said to Mercedes, let's try square wheels, they'd look in this big book and say, well, we tried that in 1928 and it vibrated too much or something, you know. Incredible.
But also, at that time along came Van Wall.
Yeah.
And how much was it was it a philosophy of yours to try to drive British cars?
I just felt that driving for the English team was what I wanted to do. And I drove for an English team right through until well, 53, and I then had a meeting called the press together and said, look, what should I do? I'd been offered the Maserati, and so they said, take the Mazda. I mean, it's better that an Englishman should win in a foreign car than not win at all. And that was, so that I took that decision.
Yeah. Van Wall was just about the most beautiful car you know.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, but awful, a dog to drive. I mean, the Van Wall won the title, therefore one can't knock it because overall it was great, but it was not nice to drive, nothing like a 250F. I mean, it was really a difficult car to drive. It had a very difficult gearbox. It was stable, but it didn't have the ease of driving. It wasn't a friendly car. I mean, if it could only have handled like a 250F, it would have been so much better, you know.
Yeah. Tell us about 1958. By this time, you were getting maybe a little overdue to be crowned yourself world champion, and 58 was the year when it should have happened.
Yeah, well, I was driving for Van Wall, and I misread a signal because I was holding the lap record up to a certain time in the race, and then Fangio, I think, took it from me, and I didn't know this. Otherwise, I could have gone a bit a bit faster, but they didn't tell me, and so I lost it that way. I lost it 1 year by 1 point, and 1 year, I think, by half a point, when it was shared drivers, and but it disappointed me very much because I really wanted us to have the world title, really did.
You're quick to sort of blame yourself, but at the same time there was the incident with Mike Hawthorn, when you went in his defence and argued against a penalty that was about to be imposed upon him. What was the story behind that?
Well, he went up the escape road and then had the car stalled and he had to push start. And they said, you can't, because you weren't allowed to push start. And the organiser said, look, I'm sorry, you're disqualified. And I said to him, look, this is very unfair. Mike didn't do anything wrong. When he was push started, he was not on the track, he was up the escape road. And so they reinstated his second place. And by reinstating that second, that took the title from me again. But you know, I mean, it's like running. You know, if you run against another guy racing, you don't want it with a broken ankle. And I felt, well, that was a fair deal.
It's the kind of thing that you can't really see happening today, but
no, I don't think you can.
But it should happen today, shouldn't it?
It should. Yes, it should. Of course, it should. It would depend. I mean, it would happen if I was racing today, and that arose. It would certainly happen. But racing isn't like that anymore. I mean, it used to be a genuine sport, you know, or sportsmen taking part, and now it is. It's fantastic drivers driving these incredible machines with an enormous amount of money there, and that was thanks to television. I mean, we're really when the money came in.
Throughout his career, Stirling raced against some of the legendary names of the sport. One of his great friends and rivals in the late 50s was the Ferrari driver and first ever British world champion, Mike Hawthorn.
We were quite different. I mean, I was sort of took it seriously. I'd be fit and all that and the other. Mike would go out and drink beer and do all that sort of thing. But yeah, no, we got along very well. In fact, I can remember in 1956, I think, I just won an Alpine rally, and Norman Garrett, the team manager, came to me and said, "Listen, are there any other drivers who might like to do this? Because obviously it suits your racing's background." So I went up to Pete and Mike, both of them, and I said, "Listen, chaps, I can get you 50 quid. And we go down there, we've got a week chasing the crumpet in the south of France where we're sort of learning bits and pieces of the thing, and they agreed. And so we had three of us in the team for £150, which is pretty surprising at that time.
And those Alpine rally days, I mean, you enjoyed that, and
fun.
so many good stories come out of those times.
But really tough. One actually had to race downhill very fast, and difficult to do on
I heard a story
cars.
of you making up something like 12 minutes on one downhill run.
Yes, exactly. I've never ever drove as hard that I can remember. I mean, I nearly collapsed when I got there.
Yeah.
I was literally actually just about in tears, and I don't know why. I suppose relief or whatever. But going down Lassay and this and that with the drop on the side, and you know, it's pretty exciting, I must say.
And you've always been a fair man, a sporting man, but there was one story of you on an Alpine rally when you had a scrutineer in the car and you had a gearbox problem.
Yeah, well, you see, stupidly, the car had to be running the way it was when it started. This was it seems to me if you have trouble, as I did, and lost a gear, it's a big inconvenience and also a handicap. But they said it had gone round that I'd lost third gear or whatever it was. So I said, well, look, I'll show you. And they put the man in beside me. And of course, he didn't realise I got an overdrive on this thing as well. It had overdrive on third, fourth, I think probably second. And so I say, right, premiere. It was one of these gear changes here, you know. So I say, right, premiere. And then I bring it into the middle, waggle it around. You see, flick this switch without him there. Does he aim? Twazzy. So of course I had the whole lot. So they said, yes, nothing wrong with your gearbox. But so that was a bit of a cheating, yeah.
What was your, I mean, we talk a lot about racing style, but what was your sense of, almost a kind of supernatural sense of vision, awareness and perception that you had in the cockpit right from day one? I had a very, very amazingly good eyesight, actually. But the most important thing I think in racing is to be able to look down at your instruments, because in my day you need to really look at the instruments quite a lot, because you get oil surge and things like that. And so I keep looking down and photograph what was there, and then look up and down and like that. And if something was out of place, if this gauge should be reading there and it was here, I would know that, and I'd sort of see it, and then I'd concentrate on whatever that was telling me.
So after again finishing second in the 1957 championship, for 58, Stirling joined forces with his friend and team owner Rob Walker for the first race of the year in Argentina.
I'd met Rob and I knew him around racing and everything, and I said to Van Wall, we would like to go to Argentina, and they couldn't get the car ready and so on. They said, can't do it. I said, well, can I have a release? And so I went to Rob and said, Rob, can I drive your car in Argentina? And he said, well, speak to Alf. So I spoke to Alf. He said, yeah, of course we can. And we go out to Argentina, which was a fantastic new circuit, very, very abrasive. And I suddenly realized that I was going to, I couldn't change tires because changing the wheel on a Cooper, of course, was a single nut, and you had to take about 2 or 3 minutes, whereas normally the other cars would come in, do it, and they'd be away in 10 seconds. And I said to Alf, I'm going to have to somehow manage to be careful with the tires. So what I did when the race started, I would drop back on the corners by saving my tires, and then on the next straight I'd close up on the slipstream. And so I went right through, and we'd get to halfway, and then the cars, the other fast ones, Musso and Castellotti and whatever, pulled in. And I'm going still slowly, and they had very low chamfered curbs, so I could go up over the curb and cool the tires on the grass without any wear, and then back on again. And so I'm going along and getting near the end, because there were 3-hour races, remember, in those days. And of course the tires normally, you've got a tread, and you can see lines when they're spinning. And then when the tread goes, it's then bald, so there's no lines. And then when it gets past that, it gets white, because it's a breaker strip. And white, when it comes, it starts off as a spot. It's going around like this. And then as you wear more, of course, the spot becomes a line. And as you wear that, then the line gets wider. And I've got these 2 things going round. And this is 5 laps to go or so. And when you go past the white, then it grows hair, because you get through to the canvas. And both these damn tires have got canvas showing. And I'm, meanwhile, trying to take it very easily. And, it just happened that luckily I was able to, I don't know whether it was brave or stupid, but I managed to just hold on to it until I crossed the line with both the front tires through to canvas. So that was, from my point of view, it worked.
Stirling returned to Van Wall for the rest of the 58 season, but joined Rob Walker's team full-time in 1959. Over the next few years, he was to have a starring role in some of the most astonishing races the sport has seen. In 1961, racing his Walker Lotus, he fought off the might of Ferrari to claim 2 of the most amazing victories of his career.
Well, Nürburgring is an incredible play. I mean, 178 corners a lap. And I realized I had to get as much lead as I possibly could on the twisty bit. And I remember going down the foxhole, as they call it, and so flat out there and up over the top and just roll back and down again. And of course, I did know the circuit very well. I mean, I've done so many races there. And I think that was one of my best races, actually. I really do.
Stirling Moss, number 7, gave a masterly display. At the wheel of a Lotus Climax, he took the lead on the first lap and fought off the Ferraris. Rain at the end didn't prevent him winning at a record speed of over 93 miles an hour.
How do you regard that Monaco race for holding off the Ferraris?
I think the Monaco race was probably my most exciting. I mean, you've got 100 laps, that's to start with in those days, and in the whole distance of the race, I don't think they were ever more than 3 seconds, more than 3 seconds behind me. And of course, my team, they hang out pit signals, and it was always sort of, +2, +2.1, +1.9, and every time they were coming around, and I knew exactly where they were, because when you come to a hairpin, of course, I could see them just over there. So I sort of wave like this, you see.
This is Phil Hill, Richie Ginter.
Yeah, Richie Ginter. And I'm waving at them, and I hope they really think that, I'm not even trying, and I'm trying like hell, you see, and managed to get through and win it.
The hardest race, you were on the limit throughout that one, weren't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard leading. Leading a race is far more difficult than being second and following, And I had to lead it, which was pretty tough for that. For the it took 3.5 hours. Actually, it was just over 3.5.
And this was in a substantially inferior car, wasn't
Yes,
it?
I was about 40 horsepower down on the Ferraris. I had the Climax with about 100, whatever it was, but we were about 50 down on the Ferrari. I think that Monaco offers something that nowhere else does. Even when we used to race on roads, Monaco was still the number one. And I remember we went, Pete Collins and I went for practice was at 7 in the morning with the 500, right? And we were racing 500cc cars there in 1950, I think. And Pete and I went into the Hotel de Paris to have a cup of coffee. And there was a dear old English lady who'd obviously gone down there to see years out. And she said, "Were you one of those young men making all that noise?" So he said, "Yes, I'm afraid we were." She said, "Well, can't you practice somewhere else?" I thought this poor old lady,
Despite all the epic races and great wins that Stirling has amassed through the years, there have been 1 or 2 occasions when he's seriously scared himself as well, not least on the banking at Monza.
This is the race of the worlds at Monza, and they brought the Indianapolis cars over, which were of course miles quicker than ours. And I had this Eldorado Special, which was a 4.5 litre Maserati engine with a 5-speed gearbox and a 2-speed axle, and which you didn't need any of that really. And we were against the American cars. And I'm going around the top with this car, sponsored by Eldorado. It was a Maserati sports, lightweight chassis with this great big engine in. And I'm going around 175-ish around the top of the banking. Well, of course, the banking goes up like this, and the higher you go, the less scrub on the tires. And I'm right up at the top to try and save the tires a bit. And I'm going like this and holding it down, and suddenly my arms crossed. Well, I'm not stupid. I knew something was wrong. And I can tell you, I mean, I've never been so scared in my life. There was nothing I could do at all. I obviously put the foot on the brakes and closed my eyes. And so I can't tell you, I didn't see it, but all I do know is that it spun down and finished up on the infield. And I'm then stationary, and I sort of open my eyes, and it's hot as hell, and there's all this sand around me, this rising sand. I thought, God, if this is hell, it's really hot, and also dusty. But so really and truly, all I got was a bang on my hand. Yeah. But really frightened me, really did frighten me.
You never did Indianapolis, which is one of the few races that's sort of missing off your CV, but that wasn't the reason why. No, I would love to have done, but in those days, the Indianapolis cars were roadsters, and you had to, because it's so important to the American pomp and circumstance, you have to go there. It takes a month, you go there, the pre-qualifying and all this sort of thing, and I just couldn't afford the time. I mean, I was racing 52 times a year, so I was racing every week, and to go out to Indy, which I'd love to have done, would take 4 weeks of races I might win. So of course it wasn't a viable proposition. Spa, you were less fortunate. You injured yourself quite badly there. Well,
I'm in the first Bernaville, I think it's called, a very, very fast right-hander in my Lotus, and a wheel came off. and there's not much you can do. And the first thing I really sort of realised, I won't say woke up, but I suddenly find myself on my hands and knees. I hear these racing, it's in practice, and I hear these racing cars come around there, and then switched off, and all the drivers, I mean about 5 or 6 drivers came along, and are you all right? And they held a blanket over me and all this thing, and then they got the blood wagging round.
It was important to get out of the car as quickly as possible, wasn't it?
Well, fire.
Yeah.
I mean, the trouble was, you see, you've got to realise we'd start in a Cooper, you've got fuel down the sides, either side, over your legs. And of course, then it was alcohol. And alcohol burns, of course, which you can't see. I mean, when it's lit, it doesn't show flames in the normal way. And it was important, if one could, to get out of the car and get away from it.
But at this time you were racing just about everything, as you say, racing just about once a week, with more or less a 50% success rate, winning 1 out of 2. Inevitably, Ferrari came back in for you, and you had a meeting with Enzo Ferrari, which consisted of what? Well,
originally, a long time before, 51 I think, would I like to drive his car? He got a new 4-cylinder and Bari. And I thought, boy, you get a call from him, you face modern, uncross yourself, and off you go, And I got down there, went to the Fiat garage, found the car. I'm getting in the car, and the mechanic comes up, who are you? And I said, I'm Stirling Moss, I'm driving this car. He said, no, you're not. He said, Taruffi's driving it. Well, Taruffi was a great driver. I mean, but anyway, as you can understand, I was pretty teed off. And I said, I will not drive for Ferrari.
Always for that reason, there was a real resentment about what happened in 51.
Literally. I mean, I drive Ferraris, of course. Rob Walker had a Ferrari, but I would not drive for him. Yeah. And then he called me up, because he hadn't had a very good year, and said, would I go down and see him? And I went down there, and he said, you tell me what car you want, 246 or 248 or whatever. Tell me what you want. And he said, I'll build it for you. But I did, before I went to see him, I got in touch with Fangio. He said, look, drive for him, but don't sign. So I said, look, I would like to very much drive for you, but I expect the car to be in Rob Walker blue. We'll look after it, you supply it and so on. And he agreed. He said, all right, Formula 1 and sports car. And of course, just after that, I had my crash because because the car hadn't arrived and I was in a Lotus and I had to crash and at Goodwood, and that finished my career, so it didn't work.
Goodwood, Easter Monday, 1962. Number 7, so often his lucky 7, careered off the track. Stirling received the severe injuries which were to end his days as a racing driver.
How much do you actually remember of that weekend, that day?
Very little.
Monday at Goodwood?
I remember meeting a very attractive South African girl the night before, actually. And then I do remember coming out from a hotel. I used to stay in a friend of mine had a very small, well, it was a pub really, stay at his pub. And I was reversing out in the Lotus Elite that I had. And those, when you close gates, you have a thing they close up on the ground. And the thing was so low that when I went out, I hit that. And so that really messed up my road car. So that wasn't a good start to the day. That was the end of it. And then, of course,
that was about the last thing you remember?
Then I woke up 4 weeks later, because I'd been unconscious 4 weeks, and there were a lot of flowers in there. I thought, God, they were expecting somebody to die. And of course, I hadn't realised quite how close I'd been. Yeah. And so I was paralysed for 6 months, and then got over that, and then, well, that was it.
How frustrating at the time, how frustrating is it now that it's still not exactly clear what went wrong?
It annoys me that I don't know what the failure was. I think it was a wet grass, and I'm not too sure. You see, I was coming up to overtake Graham Hill in the BRM, but he was a lap. I mean, I was a lap behind, so I was only unlapping myself. And I thought I saw Graham acknowledge the flag marshal. And I therefore came up to pass him. Now, Graham's line round that particular corner was much wider than mine. I'd take a close-in one. And I thought he did this, and so I went past, and just as I was coming up to him, he pulled over to his correct line, I think not even knowing I was there. I then had to go onto the grass, which was wet, and that was it. So that was the real reason, was that it was just wet grass, and of course, had no brakes.
Graham, of course, was enormously upset, and as you would expect, but...
I'm sure he wouldn't push me off, just not his sort of person,
Yeah. So you lay in hospital, and there was enormous publicity surrounding it. And was it at that time that you realised exactly the kind of impression and the place that you had in the British public's minds, and exactly the level of the profile that you'd achieved in this country?
I must say, very flattering and very humbling, actually. I mean, in my scrapbook, I've got cards from kids and showing all the little pictures of one going up in the back of another one, and you know, and all this. Very, very, very humbling, I suppose, is the only word I could say.
Yeah. And there was also a constant debate: when is he coming back? When is he coming back?
Yes.
That didn't really help, did it?
Well, Stirling, we're hoping to see you at the British Grand Prix at Aintree later this month. Do you feel that you might be able to compete?
Well, quite honestly, I feel that I most likely could if I was going to be a bit of a fool, which I've done before. That's why I'm a racing driver, really. But I think it would be silly to try. You see, the thing that people don't quite understand, in fact, I didn't understand, I mean, I don't blame them, is that, unfortunately, I banged the old lid, you know. And if you bang your head, you get contusion of the brain, which is one of the things, which means, in other words, it sort of went and twisted out of place. And this happened, and therefore it does slow up.
I said, I'm going to go back to Goodwood and have a go round. I went down there and had I think it was a Lotus 19, or anyway, a racing car, and I went round, and my times were, you know, fairly good, but the trouble was, and I realised it very quickly, that was my concentration had gone. And whereas before, you know, it would be automatic, it was not automatic anymore. I mean, before I'd say, right, I go out to this point, turn in here, apex there, and so. Now, when I went there, because my concentration wasn't there, I had to really work hard to say, right, I've got to be out here, hold back, and go in. So I thought, well, I might kill myself, and therefore I'm going to stop. And I made the decision. I think I went too early. I think if I'd waited 3 years, but then you have to go back to when it was. There's a new guy coming along called Jim Clark, who was a fantastic driver. I mean, you know, probably one of the best ever in the world. And he was coming along, and I could see, well, he's going to be difficult to beat. And you know, I had to make a decision because people were on my back all the time. Go on, are you going to do it? And so I thought, well, just won't work out.
Ahead of Goodwood, you were relishing that battle with Jim Clark. I think the whole of the sport was. Would you have gone to Ferrari? Would you have taken on Jim Clark in a Ferrari?
Yes, it would.
You would?
Yeah. I mean, it certainly would have happened, and I think with the might of Ferrari behind me, I like to hope that we could beat it. But then you see, it wasn't just Jimmy and Colin together. They're a fantastic team, because Colin could do the work and Jimmy could tell him what he wants. But then I think I'd like to hope that Ferrari and myself would have been a good team. So it's just something that never happened. I mean, it was so annoying because I had to start working for a living. I mean, I'm 32 years old, and I didn't know anything about anything. I mean, it's that serious. What can you be? I mean, really, you can be a estate agent, whatever else, or an MP. That's about all that's open to somebody. And so I had to.
They're the last resort.
And so it really did completely change my life. I mean, because if it hadn't happened, if I hadn't had the accident, I reckon I was at the top of my game, and I was only 32, and Fangio didn't retire till what, 47. So I reckon I had another 20 or 30 years.
But you were still driving, obviously not at the top level, but you do the British Touring Car Championship,
yes.
Odds and ends, which you enjoyed.
Which I was ill-advised to do, actually. I think it was a mistake. Looking back now in hindsight, I think my driving for Audi was not my smartest move. And I can see why it happened and so on, but it wasn't the right thing to do. I think I should have got out and stayed out, really.
And it was only this last year, driving competitively at Le Mans, that you decided that the final component of you as a driver had gone. And
somebody went past and I thought, you know, to keep up with that bloke, I'm going to have to begin frightening myself. And I've never been frightened. I've frightened myself when a wheel comes or something, but I've never been frightened of racing. And I thought, this isn't right. Why the hell should I go on? You know, I mean, I've done 596 races, and you know, I just thought, I'm going to get out. And it was the easiest decision I ever made. It was so easy because I could see that I wasn't equipped to go as quickly as I would need to go to be a potential winner.
Your greatest drive, you've talked about Monaco, you've talked about Nürburgring. Where would you place that 55 Mille?
I have to put it at the top, because the driving style, you see, driving on a racetrack, you know exactly where you go into the corner, where the apex is, where you come out, and all that stuff. You know all that. When you go on a road race like the Mille Miglia, 1,000 miles, you don't know any of the corners, and there are people standing on the side so you can't see. And so the style of driving, you go into a corner and realize as fast as you possibly can, and then if something suddenly happens, you back off like that hard, and then throw on correction. And you just hope that you can therefore get round the corner. And so driving when you know exactly where you want to be is one thing, but going out there and then driving and then saying, God, this is tighter than I thought, and you tighten it in and have to put correction on to save it, is a different style altogether. And I must say, it's very exciting, very exciting.
And you had Dennis Jenkinson alongside you with those sort of rudimentary pace. How on earth did he do that?
We had everything listed down on what we call the toilet roll. The amazing thing is that Jenks would give me signals which would be right, slowly, be, really serious like that, and I could interpret those to miles an hour and my foot on the throttle. It's a sort of funny thing that just happened. You see, to do a practice lap took 2 days, and that's doing 500 miles a day, which is quite a long way. And we went out and he put all the notes down, and his interpretation to me was just literally with his hand. And I mean, I remember in one of the Mille Miglias I went in, the brake pedal came off. I put my foot on the brake pedal, it snapped. And I said, and I noticed Dick looked down, and then he looks down, there's 2 pedals, and he pulls his beard, I mean, it's a stupid thing, nothing to do with anything, but, there's so much more to racing when it's dangerous, because the exhilaration of success is far higher. I mean, if you and I are playing a game and we're playing for chips, it's not very important, is it? But if we even play for 1 penny, it makes it more important. But when you're playing with your life, that gives it a whole new meaning. I think certainly now the cars are wonderful. I mean, really what they'll do. But I'm glad that I was in there when I was there, because I found that risking my neck gave me a big kick. And it's a crazy thing to say. People say, well, you must have a death wish. No way. I love life. I don't want to die. That's why I don't like being 82, actually. It's getting shorter,
Stirling, thanks for all your memories, and it's great to hear those wonderful stories again, and thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.